Welcome back. This is On the Block with Bryce. I am your host, Bryce Castle. Sorry for missing you last week. There's a couple of reasons for it. Number one, when I started streaming my podcast on all the things, Spotify and Apple and all that, I use a streaming service in which I pay a monthly fee in order to upload, certain number of hours worth of content. And I think I'm on the 12-hour a month plan, which is plenty for me. But in my excitement to get all my episodes up on Spotify and all that, I uploaded too many old episodes, and now I'm running out of time. I think I only have like an hour left until November 17th, so I'm not even able to create and release more content. If I wanted to, I guess I could put it on YouTube and then backlog it when it opens up, but I kind of just want to start fresh and start anew, so I did have to take a little bit of a break. Anyway, we're going to try to keep this episode as short and sweet as possible, so I do have enough upload time to put it out there. But also, I've been taking this opportunity to think about it, and I do want to switch the podcast for now to a once every other week basis. I haven't, with music and my board game channel and all this stuff, I haven't had the time to really give the show exactly what it needs to be a good weekly show. So I want to do it every other week so I have more time to put together a proper show. Also, the last couple of months, it's been like a current event type of show, which I'm fine with. It's just when you're doing a show every other week, it's kind of hard to do current events. So I want to kind of restructure the show a little bit, still keep current events involved, but kind of shift the show into a direction that will allow it to be on once every other week and still be effective and be a show that, is worth your while to listen to. So those are the changes. Let's dive into this episode. So, just in case you didn't know, we do have this little tiny presidential election coming up tomorrow, and to call it contentious would be quite the understatement. In fact, that would be the understatement of the year, I think. It's definitely been one hell of a ride between last year during all the Democratic debates and up until now, Trump versus Biden. And this is a different election, man. It does feel different. I know. Ever since I can remember, I think the first presidential election that I remember was 96, so Bill Clinton versus Bob Dole. And ever since then, for the last 24 years, all I've heard every 4 years is, "This is the election of our lives. Vote as if your life depended on it. We are voting with our lives." Every time, the most important election, every 4 years, it's the election of all elections. And you know what? It's all been bullshit. And in fact, in a lot of ways, I still think it is bullshit. But this election does feel different, doesn't it? It feels way different in a lot of ways. And I think the reason it feels so different is because there is something on the line. I don't think most people quite know what it is, but there is something on the line, at the very least, in a personal sense to a lot of people. And depending on which side they're leaning will depend on what that is in a personal sense. But I do think that while this is not an election for our lives, it is definitely an election that separates itself from the one we had 4 years ago and from the one we had 4 years before that and before that and before that. It's the most important one of my lifetime. And there's reasons for this. There's many, many reasons for this. Now, I am unable to vote this year because I'm going to blame COVID. I filled out my voter registration forms for Arizona. I sent them in a long fucking time ago. Never got anything back, so it's probably a little too late for me. But, that's government agencies for you, right? Find a way to be as useless as possible 24/7 and blame everything and anything else when necessary and applicable. I think my application's still sitting on a pile somewhere, and some fucking government employee is sitting there just going, I don't feel like doing it. And if somebody asks, I'll just blame COVID, and everyone will say whatever, because they can't say anything because we're a government agency, and who the fuck are you going to complain to? Like the DMV. That's what I think the goal is for government agencies. Just be useless and continue to collect checks that come out of taxpayers' pockets. But anyway, if I was going to vote this year, no doubt for you, I mean, you know me, you're probably guessing really accurately who I was going to vote for. I had planned on voting for Donald Trump this election cycle. Didn't vote for him in 2016 for a bunch of reasons. In a lot of ways, I still don't like the idea of voting for people within this system, and that's a show in itself. But and especially like growing up in California where it didn't matter which way I voted, it was just always going to be blue no matter what. So your vote really doesn't matter at all unless you're voting blue, in which, I don't think I would ever vote blue. It kills me to vote red, but I don't think I would ever vote blue either. So, but I had planned on voting for Trump this election because I do think Trump is the better choice, and I think he's the better choice because his policies have been pretty good. He's been a pretty solid president, but also it's what Joe Biden is, not necessarily what Trump is or isn't, but what Joe Biden is that pushed me to decide to vote for Trump had I been able to. And I want to talk about what Joe Biden is exactly. And I want to talk about how it contrasts to Trump. And I want to talk about why it's important to consider these things. In case you haven't voted already, in case you're on the fence, hopefully this show, at the end of this show, you'll have a little more food for thought when it comes to the candidates and what they represent and why it's so important to really, really, really consider whom you're voting for before you cast that ballot tomorrow. So there are many, many, many reasons not to vote for Joe Biden on a normal level. He's crooked. He's a liar. One of those lifelong politicians who doesn't says anything for a vote. He's one of those politicians whose bank account doesn't reflect his salary. He's one of those guys who's been around for 150,000 years and really accomplished nothing, but people keep him around because he's nice. And, he was there when my dad was there, and when his dad was there, and when his dad was there, and when his dad and his dad and his dad was there, because Joe Biden's 9,765 years old. So, whatever. He's from Delaware. He's a guy. He said some things. He's nice. He's cool. Whatever. And, honestly, the crooked politician stuff, the liar stuff, the fucking fact that he's been around and been useless for 548 years, I don't care about none of that. The scandal he's got with his son and collecting money from different governments, I don't even care about that because I think that happens way more often than people are letting on. There's a reason Republicans don't chase down these Democrats when they're caught with this crap and vice versa. There's a reason for it. It's because they don't want to let all the skeletons out of the closet. That's what I'm willing to bet. So that stuff is normal. That stuff is every day. I don't give a shit about any of that stuff. And you know what? Honestly, you shouldn't give a shit about any of that stuff either because Joe Biden's not the only one doing it. He won't be the first to get caught. Definitely not the first to get caught. He won't be the last to get caught. It's kind of baked into the cake when it comes to the plutocratic American political body. Now, if you have a problem with that political body, well, join the fucking club. I've been talking about it forever, but that's a different story this election, I think. I think the bigger news here is what Joe Biden represents. Not even what he represents, it's what he actually is. What Joe Biden is a Trojan horse for the radical left and the radical leftist ideologies that are springing up everywhere and growing like a fucking festering cancer across the United States. Now, what exactly is a Trojan horse for those who don't know? Trojan horse comes from the poem, The Odyssey by Homer. Very, very old Greek poem from a very, very long time ago. They made the movie about it in 97. Check it out. In the story, The Odyssey, Odysseus and the Greeks win the Trojan War by pretending to surrender. And they build a big-ass wooden horse on wheels. And they all hide in the body cavity of this wooden horse. And they present it to the city of Troy as a victory trophy and as a token of surrender. They wheel the horse into the gates, and Odysseus and his men wait inside the body of this horse while Troy celebrates and, parties and drinks and fucking gets high and does all this shit, and they all pass out, and they're basically incapacitated by means of their own celebration. And in the middle of the night, Odysseus and his men climb down from that Trojan horse and just wreak havoc on the city of Troy. They slaughter everyone, and they end up winning the war. So when I say that Joe Biden is a Trojan horse for the radical left, he is the horse. He is the big wooden horse in which all the radical leftists are hiding in, waiting to be wheeled into the city of Troy so they can come down when no one's paying attention and slaughter everyone and take over. That's what it means to call someone a Trojan horse, and that is exactly what Joe Biden is. So, we've established what he is. Who is the left? This is a big question, right? Because there's a lot of different branches of leftism out there, but they all kind of equal out to the same thing, or at least the same conclusion. And you've heard me talk about the left in many different shows, but I want to give you a big fucking slice of who they are in this show so you can really understand what it is we're talking about here when I say Joe Biden is a Trojan horse for the radical left. So you know exactly how many soldiers and what type of soldiers are hiding in that big wooden cavity that is Joe Biden's Trojan horse. Okay, so as a whole, what exactly is the left? It's pretty simple. The left these days are the group of people who call themselves Democrats who, in one way or another, participate in the philosophy known as Wilsonian democratic philosophy. The Wilsonian democratic principles was the idea that the Constitution of the United States, the thing that governs how our government is supposed to work, the thing that defines what the checks and balances are so that one branch of government doesn't have too much power over the other, and the subsequent Bill of Rights that are attached to the Constitution, the thing that the thing that recognizes our rights that we have that supersede government and God and nature and all that stuff. The Wilsonian theory of democratic principle believes that those things are merely a barrier, a obstacle, a stopgap into getting what they want out of government. They believe that the government should be big enough to do things for people, and that the Constitution is simply just a roadblock to that. And so their theory, the leftist theory, the Wilsonian leftist theory, is that the Constitution should be, whenever and all possible, removed or pushed aside in order to do and become what they want to do and become. And of course, they mask this off as saying, well, we're doing it for you, but they're really doing it for themselves. And the reason you know you're doing it from themselves is because the Wilsonian philosophy, the Wilsonian democratic philosophy, is very, very close to the Marxist philosophy. And Marxism is basically a system in which absolute power is the only driving force in the universe, that only people at the top spot matter. Everything else is a product of what that top spot determines things to be. When you're at the top, you make all the rules, basically. That's how Wilsonian theory looks at the Constitution. Whoever sits at the top can do what they want with it. That's how Marxism looks at life. Whoever sits at the top can do what they want with it. And so that is what the left is. Those are the soldiers hiding out in that Trojan horse body that is Joe Biden. And this is broken up into many different types of people. It comes at you in many different ways. The first wave of leftists we can talk about, the ones that you've seen a lot on the TV these days, is Black Lives Matter, BLM, right? The Black Lives Matter movement. And what Black Lives Matter reports to be are groups of people who fight for racial justice in a country where systematic oppression exists. What they actually are, they're Marxists. They're self-admitted Marxists. The founders of Black Lives Matter describe themselves as Marxists. In fact, if you look at Karl Marx's writings and you look at BLM's philosophies, they're right in place. They're the same philosophies. In fact, you could just take out certain keywords in Marxist writings like proletariat and the wealthy and capitalists and replace them with BLM keywords like race and blacks and whites and privilege, and it would all line up. You wouldn't need to edit anything else. Black Lives Matter is just Marxism using race instead of class in order to push forth their agenda. Now, Marxism is a very, very dangerous philosophy for many reasons. Now, mostly Marxism is dangerous because it makes the very, very simple yet very, very catastrophic mistake of generalizing people into very, very basic strands of identity in order to dictate not only who and what they are, but what it is they need to be better or do better. Now, Marxism did this with class initially, that poor people only need money and they'll be fine, that people are only driven by financial gain. This, of course, is untrue. People are driven to do all sorts of things for all sorts of reasons. And poor people are not okay for all sorts of reasons other than the fact that they don't have money. In fact, people with money tend to suffer from the same problems as poor people do when it comes to psychological conditions, for example. So he discredits all that and just says money equals better. It's a generalized, broad system in which poor people are grouped into one thing and rich people are grouped into another, so you can easily define them, manipulate them into how you want, and easily, quote-unquote, fix it. But you can't because you're not dealing in the realities of the world. Black Lives Matter does the same thing. If you're black, you are oppressed and you must think like this, and if you're white, you are privileged and you must think like that. And there are no gradations, because if there were gradations, that would mean everyone's an individual, and Marxists they can't thrive on individuality, because then you would have to admit that everyone has a choice, when the whole purpose of Marxism is to say that you were born without a choice and that's why we need to change. Now, for purposes of time constraints, I'm really oversimplifying this, probably to my own chagrin, but it is what it is. Bear with me. The point I'm trying to make is that BLM is just Marxism using race instead of class. And much like the Marxist revolutions throughout the 20th century, who were constantly chasing this utopian dream of everything being perfect in its socialistic philosophy, it was never reached. It was never reached because, A, it's not rooted in truth. You can't quite plant your roots into soil that's bad. And the soil they were planting the roots in is that money fixes all things and that poor people are more just than rich people. So if you just give poor people the power, everything will be better. That's not that didn't happen. And BLM's the same thing. Black people are impoverished and they are victims of this oppressive white culture. And if the white culture just gets out of the way and black people take over, everything will be better. And of course, that is just not true. And the reason it's not true is not because one group of people based on skin color actually do a better job than others. It's because if you are willing to admit that, then you couldn't consider yourself a type of person who says skin color and race don't matter. In fact, isn't that what we've been saying, right? Like, as a constitutional type of American, you do believe that skin color doesn't make a difference. There are good people and there are bad people. Skin color has nothing to do with it. It all comes down to individual choice. But as a BLM-style Marxist, you can't possibly believe that, because if it all comes down to choices, then the responsibility of bad situations then falls on you, and then it can't be the fault of someone else, and then the answer can't be to just take the spot they have, because if it all comes down to individual choices, it doesn't matter what spot you're at, you're still going to make poor choices because you're a poor choice-making motherfucker. And they can't have you thinking that way, so instead they generalize you, they put you in a box over here and a box over here, and these are good guys, these are bad guys, and if the good guys just take the spot of the bad guys, then everything will be better. Of course, again, that's not true, and the wheel goes round and round and round. You see how I'm repeating myself? It's like, if this happens, and this happens, and this happens, but this has to happen for this to happen. It goes round and round and round. And that's the problem with Marxism, because the goal they're chasing is unobtainable because it is not rooted in reality. It's not rooted in truth. So you're basically chasing waterfalls. You're chasing rainbows. There's no gold at the end of it. It's just a circle of ever-moving fuckery, and it doesn't stop. That doesn't stop them from thinking they're making progress, even if they have to riot to get it, and that's probably the biggest problem that most people have with BLM. If you want to break it down to philosophy like we just did, you can do that, but I think just on the surface level, BLM riots. Every time they protest, it turns into a riot. And why do they feel it's justified to riot? Because a perceived innocent black guy got killed by the cops. Now, perceived innocence is no longer a thing. Like with the Michael Brown thing, there was hands up, don't shoot, and the guy in Baltimore who died in police custody. Like, they at least had, at least on surface value back in the day, some semblance of a case. Like, this guy was handcuffed in the back of a car, and they were driving too rough, and he broke his neck, or whatever the fucking story was. Or Michael Brown, we didn't see him wrestling with the cop. It looks like he was trying to give up, and they shot him. The idea from Black Lives Matter used to be that innocent black men were getting picked off by cops for no reason. Now, they're just blowing past all that and going, anytime a black guy gets shot by the cops, doesn't matter the reason, we're just going to riot. That is who's in Joe Biden's Trojan horse. That is just one faction of leftists in Joe Biden's Trojan horse. There's more. Another militant group out of the Wilsonian leftist mindset of today's America is Antifa. Now, despite what Joe Biden says, Antifa is more than just an idea. Antifa is a fully fledged movement. I think we've seen enough video and pictures and all that to understand that they are a well-funded movement. Who's funding them? That question is still yet to be answered or even asked, really. Nobody's really asked that. I think I'm the only person who has asked, where the fuck does Antifa get their money from? But I'm digressing. Antifa. Who is Antifa? Well, they can be most closely compared to the brown shirts from early 1930s Germany, or the Bolsheviks from early 1900s Russia. Now, who were the brown shirts? Well, the brown shirts were people who believed in the Nazi ideology, who believed in what Hitler was saying before Hitler came to power, when Hitler was just running for office. They believed in his message that, Germany was the greatest nation on earth, and that the Aryan race, where the Germans get their heritage from, was the master race, and that everyone else was beneath them. That the Jews were to blame for all of Germany's ills, that the master race must rule as a master race, and that they must use everybody else beneath them to fund and perpetuate the utopia in which they were owed for being the master race. They bought into all of these things. And while they were passing out pamphlets and all the things that, people do when they're trying to start the movement. The brown shirts were a group of people who, if you didn't take the pamphlet, or if you didn't repeat the pamphlet, or if you didn't vote to what the pamphlet was telling you to vote for, they would kick the ever-living shit out of you. They would mob you. They would destroy your home. They would beat the fuck out of you. They would steal shit off your wife. They'd fucking harass you. They'd throw things at your house. They'd follow you. They'd threaten you. These are what brown shirts did. They were called brown shirts because they wore brown shirts. That's what they were. So they were followers of Hitler's who believed in Hitler's ideology, and they spread the ideology far and wide. And anyone who said, "Oh, that's a stupid ideology," they just beat the fuck out of them. Antifa does this very thing. We've seen this in videos on YouTube where they mob people at restaurants and tell them to say Black Lives Matter and all this other thing, and people won't do it, and they fucking attack them. They attack people holding American flags. They sucker punch people who have Trump hats on. It's fucking this is brown shirts. Mussolini's fascist following before Mussolini took power, they did this thing too. In fact, Mussolini was big on violence. He thought violence was a way to show the true masculinity that was the Italian fascists. And so he promoted violence against people like socialists and people like capitalists and people who believed in religion and Jews and whoever else. He said, go ahead and attack them because they are all feminine. We are the strong fascist Italian masculines, and we will fucking grind them into dust if they don't see how we see. The Bolsheviks did the very same thing. So when Stalin was an up-and-comer in Lenin's revolutionist camp, he decided he was going to fund the socialist movement, the Bolshevik movement, by strong-arming people. So Stalin would put together guys and they'd rob a bank, or they'd rob a guy. They'd beat the shit out of them, steal everything. Now, Lenin wasn't actually really in favor of this, but he did turn a blind eye to it. He didn't want an upheaval in violence because he didn't think it would work, but he couldn't, he was seeing results. So he looked the other way while Stalin just fucking brutally just fucked up anyone he came across who he thought deserved it. Rich people, banks, and the like. So they were robbing banks, strong-arming people, kicking the shit out of everybody. And of course, when Stalin finally did come to power, that mentality stayed, didn't it? Now, I don't need to tell you any more about the final solution from Hitler or anything like that, or what Mussolini did. So that's Antifa. They're the modern-day brown shirts. They're the modern-day Bolsheviks. They are the modern-day masculine fascist Italians from, the 1930s and 40s. Their behavior reflects that. And that is also who is in the Trojan horse that is in Joe Biden. Now, at this point, you might be thinking, okay, those are extreme factions of leftist ideologies, but that doesn't necessarily represent the elected officials who are in office. I mean, there's no way it could because they wouldn't be in office for very long, right? I mean, people would be ready to vote them out, just like they were ready to vote out elected officials in the 20s and 30s who were members of the Klan. Wrong you are, my friends. Let me tell you why. Let's take a look at the rioting that's going on in cities like Portland, Seattle, Los Angeles, Minneapolis, New York, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., Chicago. I'm missing a few, though. The one up in Wisconsin where Jacob Blake was shot, I forget the name of that. Philadelphia now. What do all those cities have in common? In fact, what do most of those states have in common? Their mayors and governors are all Democrats. All of them. Now, if rioting ever gets out of hand, the National Guard's called in, the cops start cracking heads and arresting people and laying down the law, curfews are called in, etc. Now, we've seen curfews, but we haven't really seen the criminalization of the riots, have we? Now, it's important to note that all these mayors in these cities, the Chicagos of the world, the Portlands, the Seattles, they're all democratically run. Republican cities do not have this problem. Even in a democratically run area like Phoenix, where I live, because the governor is Republican and because Phoenix has its own National Guard, you don't see riots happening. You don't see riots happening at large in states like Texas or Florida. You're just not seeing it. And the reason you're not seeing it, Atlanta's another city that's rioting too, that's important. The reason you're not seeing it is because apparently Republican governors don't mess around. Nor should Democratic governors, honestly. Nobody should be okay with riots, and yet riots are happening in these democratically elected and run and controlled cities, states. So to sit there and say that these mayors aren't for it, well, it's just laughable. To sit there and say that Democrats aren't for it is absolutely laughable. How come you haven't heard any Democrat in the Senate saying, hey, states, get control of your riots. Everybody, from the media to the elected officials to the mayors to the Democrats, governors, all on the left, all Democrats, they're all calling it peaceful protests and mostly peaceful. They're really trying to sell you on this mostly peaceful. Well, mostly peaceful still means somewhat violent, doesn't it? I mean, Ted Bundy was a mostly peaceful guy until he was chopping chicks' heads off and fucking their skulls, right? I mean, Michelle Obama's argument was, out of all the protests, only 7% of them have turned into riots. Only 7%. Well, there's been like 5,000 demonstrations over the summer. 7%, that's a lot of fucking violence, wouldn't you say? Imagine if Ted Bundy went on trial and said, well, Your Honor, I only killed 7% of the women I interacted with. Do you think they would have not given him the chair? They'd have given him the chair, and rightfully so. They did give him the chair, thank God. But I'm digressing. The point I'm trying to make is that these riots, these protests, these extremist behaviors from BLM, Antifa, and the like, they are supported by people in government. These Democratic mayors nationwide have normalized rioting as a behavior that is seen as okay, going so far as to calling in curfews for people not breaking the law to give room to rioters who are destroying businesses and property nationwide. They're so okay with it that they are willing to tie the hands of the police and say, don't go after the rioters, don't arrest the rioters, let them burn the city down. Let them do it. Let's give them room to burn. Not caring about what it is exactly that they're burning. They were okay with letting people take over entire neighborhoods in Seattle, the whole Chaz Chop fiasco. They're okay with police getting their eyes blinded by people pointing lasers in Portland. They're okay with whole sections of the city burning down in New York, D.C., Baltimore, Atlanta. That's a problem. And they're okay with it up until the point where it comes to their front door. The mayor of Chicago, who told the police don't do anything until the rioters came to her front door, then she had the police barricade around her house. And when they asked her, well, why would you do that? You told the police they couldn't do anything when they were attacking the Loop, but you won't let them attack your house? And she had the audacity to say, well, me and my family deserve to be safe. The mayor of Portland, Ted Wheeler, who was all for letting Portland burn to the ground, well, he hightailed it out of there after they started launching fireworks at his house. I mean, not only is there great hypocrisy in this movement, but they have allowed it. And they allow it only till it reaches their front door, but then they just take off. Or they don't even acknowledge their hypocrisy, and they still allow the cities to burn. In fact, I'm willing to bet, no matter who wins this election tomorrow, you will see riots. Obviously, if Trump wins, there will be riots in all the major Democratic cities in protest of Trump's re-election. But if Joe Biden wins, it's safe to assume that people will riot just out of celebration, like they did in Los Angeles when the Lakers won the NBA championship a couple weeks ago. They just rioted just for the fuck of it, because the mayors of these Democratic cities have allowed them to riot. They have normalized the behavior of rioting as a part of city life in these Democratic-run cities and states. So to sit there and say that the people in elected office do not necessarily represent the extreme leftist mindsets of BLM and Antifa, you're absolutely wrong. These mayors and these governors have normalized rioting as a normal, basic, and even decent behavior by masking it as quote-unquote peaceful protest or mostly peaceful or whatever. They have the media on their side trying to cover it up as well. They are just a part of the problem. The normalization of rioting is also hiding in the Trojan horse that is Joe Biden and the radical left. Okay, now for a more classic critique on the Wilsonian Democratic mindset, and that is the idea of they like big government. They love big government. Their solution to everything is big government. And if big government fucks up, well, we'll just make the government bigger to correct that fuck up. And if the bigger government fucks up, we'll make the government even bigger. Their answer is always bigger government. And again, the Democratic Wilsonian line of thinking is that government should be used as a tool to mandate the things that they want in order to give you what you need. But you have to keep this in mind about a government that's large enough to give you everything you want. They're also large enough to take everything away. And make no mistake, when push comes to shove, they have no problem taking everything away from you. Let's use these riots we were talking about as a perfect example. The mayor has the power to call in a curfew. Maybe you're not doing anything wrong, but you're put on curfew anyway. And then that same mayor allows rioters to destroy your business. And the answer is, well, we hope you have insurance. Doesn't matter that your insurance premiums are going to go up because what insurance company would insure a business that's in a neighborhood where the mayor allows people to riot? Doesn't matter. The mayor has allowed it. The mayor has then taken everything away from you. But they were big enough to be able to do it because we decided that the mayor has the power to call in curfews. Now, of course, you would make the argument, a sensible person would make the argument, is what's the point of calling in the curfew if you're not going to do anything to quell the riots? Calling in the curfew to allow the riots, then there's really no point of calling in the curfew because all you're doing is punishing law-abiding people while allowing criminals to run free. But you see, that's the trick of big government. They're allowed to do that kind of stuff. They can do whatever they want as long as it's in the name of what they consider the public good. Now, if that type of efficiency sounds familiar to you, then look no further than the DMV. The DMV is a jumbled, overly bureaucratic organization designed to do one thing and one thing only: frustrate you to the point where you throw your hands up in the air, give them all the money that they ask for, and in return, they allow you to drive on their roads. That's what you get when you get big government. Big bureaucrats who constantly find ways to frustrate you to the point where you just give them whatever they're asking for in order to give you the permission of something that you technically wouldn't need their permission for anyway. You either know how to drive or you don't. A little piece of plastic or a license plate isn't going to determine that you know how to drive if you do. It's also going to not determine that you don't know how to drive if you don't. But that's big government for you. They want that in your healthcare. They want that in your religion. They want that in your home, for fuck's sake, at this point. They already have it in your schools. And what do we all know about the DMV? They're frustrating. And they're frustrating because they're the only place you can go if you want to drive. If the government has their way, they'll be the only place you can go if you want to learn. And the only place you can go if you want to worship. And we all know the DMV is designed to make people so fucking incredibly frustrated they just don't want to fucking deal with them anymore. So what do? They pay up a bunch of money to just get them to go away. Imagine paying a fine in order to worship. Well, that's pretty much not what the First Amendment's all about. But you see, when you're Wilsonian-minded, the First Amendment is just an obstacle, you see. It's just an obstacle to get what they want, which is total governmental control, so that they can give you all the things that you say you want. But remember, they can also take away everything you have. Here's another example of that: welfare. Now, welfare is designed to help people out who are in poverty. And that's fine, and you've heard me say I'm for some sort of welfare system in this country, much different than what we have now, because what we have right now works like this. You have to make, or you have to not make, a certain amount of money. So you have to be below a certain amount of income in order to receive the government assistance. If you're at a job and you get offered a promotion, you have to then turn the promotion down, because the promotion will pay you enough to be past the line of needing government assistance, but it won't be enough to supplement what the government assistance covers. Therefore, you have to turn the promotion down, you do not get to advance, and you're stuck in poverty. And the government's answer for that is more government to give you more money. But then the problem just persists. Big bureaucratic government just creates more frustrating bureaucratic policies, which in turn fucks with you in every way possible. Joe Biden represents the Democratic Wilsonian-minded party who continues to want big government so that they can cram rules down the throats of everyone, rules which, by the way, they don't have to follow. Need I remind you, Nancy Pelosi getting her hair did during a very strict lockdown time in San Francisco. So if you vote for Wilsonian Democratic type of politicians, if you vote for Joe Biden, those are also tucked in to the Trojan horse. Okay, let's talk about COVID-19 real quick. The Democratic argument is that Donald Trump personally botched this whole thing. Joe Biden has even gone so far as to say that had he been in charge instead of Trump, all 230,000 people who have died from COVID so far would still be alive. Now that's a bold statement. It's a bold statement because it's a bullshit statement. It's just simply not true. You can look at some of the most left-leaning countries in all the world and they've been wiped out en masse as well. Nobody's really had a handle on COVID. And you've heard me say this time and time again. It's really hard to have a handle on something when it's playing out in real time. That goes true for politicians, for scientists, for you, for me, for everybody. The Democratic answer to COVID in this country has been questionable at best. At worst, it's been a total disaster in which the media cover up for. Look no further than Andrew Cuomo in New York, who sent 11,000 senior citizens to their death by forcing people who had COVID back into nursing homes where it spread like wildfire and killed, 11,000 people, possibly unnecessarily. In fact, I would say mostly unnecessarily. But he won't ever get credit for that. They blame Trump. So the lie right there should tell you something about how COVID might have been dealt with by the left, by guys like Joe Biden and all the Wilsonian-minded Democrats. But it goes further than that. You see, the answer to COVID from people on the left is forced mask mandates, which constitutionally they can't do. But again, remember, when you're a Wilsonian Democrat, the Constitution is just a roadblock to the power in which you seek. So they were for mask mandates that they constitutionally cannot enforce. There are for permanent lockdowns. I mean, for fuck's sake, look at California. They're still locked down. It's amazing. The rest of the country is opening up. The rest of the world is opening up all over the place. And California still refuses to open up. In fact, the governor of California recently issued a mandate about how many people you can have at your house for Thanksgiving and where they're allowed to sit and what they're allowed to do and when they're allowed to eat. I mean, this shit is ridiculous. Now, he has no constitutional authority to do that. But again, Wilsonian-minded Democrats see the Constitution as what? Bingo. Roadblock to what they really want to get. It's hilarious to me when Democrats sit there and say that we could run it better when all their policies so far in the states and cities that they control have not contributed to the betterment of the country in regards to COVID-19. If I'm not mistaken, out of the 15 states hardest hit by COVID in terms of death, 14 of them were democratically run states. Across the country, the cities hardest hit by COVID in terms of death have been democratically run cities. Now, what do these cities and states all have in common? They are way stricter on masks, they are way more stringent with the lockdowns, and yet the shit's still happening. So for them to get up there and say that if they were in charge, they could have ran it better by doing the things they have been doing and continuing to do the things that they're doing, that things would be better. I mean, well, first of all, it's wrong. It's not true. But secondly, it makes you wonder why the fuck they're doing it to begin with. Now, could it be that they're stupid enough to believe that these policies would just work if they were the ones in charge of enforcing them, even though they are the ones in charge of enforcing them? But again, when you're leftist-minded, the top spot's the only thing that matters. So maybe something in their fucking head tells them that, well, you know, if we were in the presidency, then things would get better, even though they would be doing the same things they're doing now. Maybe some of them are that stupid, but I have a feeling they know. I have a feeling that they just like having this type of power. I have a feeling they enjoy telling people they need to wear masks, whether or not science promotes it. I think they really enjoy telling businesses they have to stay closed. I think they enjoy having that type of power. I think they enjoy being able to point at somebody and go, you are essential so you can be open, and you are not, so you have to be closed because science, without actually defining what science means in that particular case. The mayor of my city that I live in, don't remember his name, I just call him asshole. I caught him on a news interview one time, just smiling his fucking face off, talking about, yeah, I know it's hard, but you know, I have to decide these businesses need to be closed and these don't need to be closed. This is just someone who enjoys this. And that's what I think it's really about. They just enjoy being able to tell people they have to stay home. They enjoy it. I can't think of any other reason aside from absolute stupidity, which, I mean, is definitely possible with these fucking people, but I really do think it's the enjoyment of power. And the reason I think that is because, again, they have a leftist Marxist mentality where the top spot, where ultimate power is the only thing that matters. So why wouldn't it then be all about power and total control for them? So say what you want about the Trump administration's handling of COVID-19. Maybe he did a good job, maybe he didn't. There's a lot of things I'm critical of. But nobody did a good job. Now, as we're moving forward, we are starting to do a better job. People are opening up. The case rates, while staying consistent, the death rates are dropping. That's because we have better therapeutics. It's because we know more about this disease. We know who's affected by it, who's not. I think the people who need to be careful are already being careful on their own. You know, one of the biggest things that bugs me about the masks is not the fact that companies are asking people to wear them inside their stores. It's the fact that companies are asking people to wear them inside the stores because the government has forced them to ask. That's what bothers me about them, is that it's the government bullying businesses into bending to their will because the government knows they have no constitutional authority to mandate something like masks or to even lock things down the way they have. They rely on the participation of the businesses who will fall in line because they don't want to get blacklisted by a bunch of people who are scared to death based on false information. That's what I have a problem with, and that's what we see. We see a group of people, again, leftist-minded thinking, where the top spot and top power is all that matters, raining down these Orwellian-style mandates to keep people locked away and hidden and closed off and forced to wear things on their face. Whether or not it does any good doesn't matter. They just enjoy doing it. And if you get Biden in there, the Trojan horse that he is, that horse is filled with people in his cabinet who will be on board and advocating for practices such as those, regardless of whether or not they work. And I think by looking at California, New York, Chicago, we can see that they most certainly don't. Now, speaking of Orwellian, the Wilsonian Democratic left have really gone off the deep end with some of this Orwellian-style stuff. If you haven't read George Orwell's 1984, pick yourself up a copy, read that shit right away. You will be freaked out with all the similarities you see between the evil inner party of Orwell's 1984 and the leftist party calling themselves Democrats that we have today. The biggest thing I think they've done, the most terrifying thing, honestly, that I think they've done, is they have practiced in a term known as doublethink so hard that they can't go back. You know, a couple episodes back, we called it going to plaid. You know, the Spaceballs reference, like they've gone to full plaid. They've hit the fucking light speed. They're going so fast and so hard that they can't stop at this point. Dangerous to stop. The doublethink in which they are practicing is this idea of what Trump is versus what they have to do to stop him. And this is an episode in itself, so I'm going to try to kind of condense it while also generalizing. Here we go, wish me luck. So, in 2016, Trump was shown by the left as like the ultimate evil, right? He's a fascist, he's a racist, he's a Nazi, he's gonna set black people back, he hates Mexicans. Like they just painted him up to be this giant evil person who was going to do all these giant evil things. And when he was painted as Hitler, who in the West is perceived to be the face of evil, the embodiment of ultimate evil, when you paint somebody as Hitler in office, you then are able to justify all sorts of awful things in order to stop Hitler, right? Because Hitler is the ultimate evil, and if in order to stop the ultimate evil, the ends is going to have to sometimes justify the means. And this is what they've done. The ironic part about it, and this is where the doublethink comes in, is that in order to quote-unquote stop Trump, they have become all the things that they said Trump was. So they called Trump a fascist who was going to stomp on your free speech. Enter Antifa, who is doing literal fascist things that are reminiscent of the Nazi brown shirts, the fascist Italians from the 30s, or the criminal arm of the Bolsheviks, who kick the shit out of you if you don't think the way they think. They are suppressing your free speech if you don't think what they think, using violence. The same thing they said Trump was going to do, they ended up doing. They said Trump was going to rip the country apart with division, but the only people doing any of the dividing are the people calling everyone a racist if they like Trump. They have become the very things that they said Trump was going to be, and they justify it because they must stop Trump. So they justify the evil they accuse Trump of to stop Trump from doing the evil they said he was going to do. That's out there, man. That's they've said that they are the good guys the whole time because, again, the ends justify the means. This is a perfect practice of the art of doublethink. This is an Orwellian term used to describe the government's ability to get people to believe contradicting things at the same time. So, like, if you say Trump's an evil person, we are going to do the very evil thing that we say he's going to do in order to stop him, you justify it and say it's okay. Like, you don't make the connection that they're actually doing the evil thing, Trump's not. That's doublethink. It's mind control, basically. It's essentially what it is. But that's what the left has done. Antifa has decided it's okay to commit fascist acts of violence in order to stop Trump, who they believe is an evil, fascist, violent person. He's not. I haven't seen one violent thing Trump has ever done in a fascist way. Now, a lot of people will talk about the things Trump has said, and that is its own can of worms, which we will get to. But for now, let's just focus on this doublethink thing. The only other groups of people I can think in recent memory who have committed extreme acts of violence in order to suspend what they perceive to be the violence of those they're committing the acts against, again, are the Nazis and the Bolsheviks. They are the Ho Chi Minh followers who took all the educators and the doctors and the lawyers of Vietnam, lined them up and shot them and buried them in mass graves. You know, Mao did the same thing when he was in charge of China. North Korea has been known to do the same thing. Take all the people who disagree with you and just kill them, because the people who disagree with you are evil, you see. And so we must eliminate that evil. Now, you've heard this with BLM and racism and Antifa and racism, that racism must be stopped, and therefore the people who practice racism must be stopped. But here's where Newspeak, another Orwellian term, comes into the picture. They've been able to get corporations to bend to their will, and this includes the dictionary, Webster's and other dictionary companies like that, to where they're changing the very definition of words in order to fit into the ideology of what makes a person evil. So racism used to mean somebody who thinks that there are differentiating characteristics between races, and that those differentiating characteristics are lined up in a hierarchical structure of some being greater than others based specifically on the skin color of a person versus another. That was racism. Very simple, very easy to understand, and also very philosophically evil. No argument about that, but you see what the left has done in the recent years is they have changed racism to mean just about anything they need it to mean. So if you sit there and say, I don't think there's such thing as white privilege, that can now be considered racist. If you sit there and say, well, I judge people based on their individual character and not their skin color, that's actually now also perceived as racist. Anything can be perceived as racist because they have gotten to the point where they can just change the meaning of words in order to fit the evil they're seeking out. We saw this in the Me Too movement as well, where rape, obviously, we know what rape is, forced sexual interaction from one individual to an unwilling participant. Very easy, very evil, universally accepted as evil, at least in this country. But rape no longer means just that, you see. If a girl says no after the fact, after she's already agreed to have sex, if she changes her mind later, that can also, according to the Me Too movement, be considered rape. So they're creating these examples of newspeak where words no longer mean what they used to mean, and other words have become so fluid that they can mean anything you want in order to justify the action you're going to take against the person and what you're taking the action against. They're changing language in order to change your thought. And again, when ultimate control is your only principle of giving by to a leftist mindset, then you can do anything in order to maintain that control, including changing the definition of words to fit people into the box. Again, leftists like to fit people into easily definable boxes so they can justify the evil they do to them in order to supposedly stop the evil they accuse them of doing. That's why racism has become what it is, because we can all agree that racism is an evil practice, but we want to call all the people who don't agree with us evil. Well, just change the definition of racism, and now we can all fit them into the term evil, and then we can do whatever we want to them. This is Orwellian in nature, it's psychotic in practice, and it's wrong in its very theory. And yet, this is what we're seeing with the Wilsonian democratic leftist mindset. And again, you could sit there and say, well, that's just Antifa, that's just BLM, but look at the democratic leaders who have allowed those particular groups to run roughshod through their cities and let things burn down. Look at the social media platforms who take information or who block information as they see fit. So somebody can sit there and post anti-Semitic things all they want, and they're not taken down. Louis Farrakhan, for example. But the moment somebody posts something about Joe Biden's family, it's immediately blocked. They are warping what is true and what is not. They are bending the definition of truth. They are telling the story in their own way. And if you don't believe it, they can just call you evil. And then they can treat you however they want. This is what you get if you vote Joe Biden. Because inside the Trojan horse that is Joe Biden are scores of leftists who have this exact mentality. So I think I've made a pretty good case so far of what you're getting if you vote Joe Biden. He is definitely a Trojan horse, make no mistake about it. You vote for Biden, you are going to get everything that comes with that package. And you might sit there and tell me, no, that can't be possible. Joe Biden doesn't endorse BLM. He doesn't endorse Antifa. He doesn't endorse, he condemns violence of all kinds. Remember he says that? I condemn violence of all kinds. Here's the thing. Joe Biden's 78 years old. Okay, jokes aside, he's 78. If he makes it through his first term, if elected, he'll be 82. But here's the kicker. He's got the beginning stages of dementia. He's falling apart. Anybody who knows any little thing about what happens to a person once dementia starts kicking in knows that they fall apart very, very fast. He's not cognitive most of the time. Have you heard him in interviews? The fumbling for words, the misnaming people, not knowing what state he's in. Now, during the debates, he holds himself up pretty well. I have news for you. There's a shot they can give him for that. Not illegal, he's not on crack or anything like that. There are medications that you can inject into somebody, and as long as their dementia isn't too far along, they're up, they are awake, they are alert. They are giving him things during those debates. They are giving him things during those big primetime interviews and such that keep him sharp, that keep him just sharp enough to get through. So him on his own, though, there's no way he can hold up. In fact, the Democratic Party knows this. Kamala Harris was so unpopular in the Democratic run for president that she opted out even before the DNC came to California because she knew that she couldn't even win her own state. She was so unpopular for so many reasons, and yet she's the vice presidential pick. Now, this, of course, is virtue signaling on Joe Biden's part, but we've already assumed that Joe Biden is not going to make it through a term if he becomes president, because believe you me, he will not. And I am willing to make the argument right here and now that the people in his circle, including Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, also believe that he will not make it through his first term. And the proof is in the pudding. Right now, as we speak, Nancy Pelosi is trying to rework the 25th Amendment. And what the 25th Amendment in the Bill of Rights allows is for the House to determine whether or not a president is capable of fulfilling their duties, and if not, removing them from office and allowing somebody else, the vice president presumably, to step in. Now, as of now, it's designed for if a president is sick and dying or has been assassinated, things like that. She's looking to broaden it so that she can basically decide on a whim, arbitrarily, when she thinks the president is incapable of performing his job functions. Do you think that's a coincidence? Do you think that's a coincidence? I don't think so. Now, some say, well, she's doing it so she can pull Trump out of office. No, it's not so she can pull Trump out of office, although it wouldn't surprise me. It's so she can pull Joe Biden aside and put Kamala Harris in. Kamala Harris, one of the least popular Democratic presidential candidates from the DNC. When all those Democrats were running for president, she was one of the least popular people. She was right down there with fucking Cory Booker. But she's going to be president of the United States? Come on. To quote Joe Biden, come on, man. Come on. That's bad. That's really bad. It almost looks as if they're planning this shit out, doesn't it? Almost looks as if they have a game plan for Joe Biden. Aside from that being elder abuse, it just goes to show how little in control Joe Biden actually is. So when I say he's the Trojan horse, when I say he's the big shiny trophy that's going to get them through the city, through the doors of the city, so that the people inside, the real threat, can descend upon and wipe everybody out when they're not looking. Now it starts to look a little more logical, doesn't it? Now it starts to kind of take shape, doesn't it? Make no mistake, Joe Biden is too mentally incompetent. He's falling apart. He cannot be president. He does not have the mental capacity. They know this. They're trying to rework the system to ensure that they can pull him away when they need to put Kamala Harris in charge. And who is Kamala Harris? She is one of the, if not the most left-leaning, socialist mindseted Democratic senator that America has ever seen, at least in recent times. Not to mention she's a totally fucking corrupt politician who has done some very, very, very skeezy things. What kind of president will you have in Kamala Harris? Well, let's break it down real quick. You're going to have the lady who withheld evidence that would have saved the man from death row. The California Supreme Court had to order police, to kick in her fucking office door and remove that evidence to save this guy from dying. He was an innocent man who would have been put to death. She didn't want to give the evidence up because of her fucking ego. This was back when she was AG for California. This is a woman who locked people up for 20 years at a time for smoking marijuana while she smoked it herself. This is a woman who literally slept her way to the top, only to prosecute the very man that she was fucking to get the position later on down the line. His response to that story was, that's politics for you. Well, actually, that's politics for her. She plays dirty. She is very, very ambitious, very ambitious. Of course, again, when you are a Wilsonian, democratic, leftist mindset, all that matters is the top spot, and the Constitution and all those other things are just roadblocks in order to reach it. And I see nobody more ambitious, nobody more interested in the top spot than Kamala Harris. It's not a coincidence. They have this planned out. If Joe Biden wins, the Trojan horse trapdoor will open. All the crazy leftists will descend upon the city of Troy when we are asleep. Everyone will be slaughtered. Metaphorically speaking, of course. Now listen, all this talk of anti-Biden, and I'm very anti-Biden, by the way, but that doesn't necessarily mean when it comes to you, I'm arguing pro-Trump. That's not what I'm doing. I don't want you to make that mistake. I do not think Trump is the answer to all of these problems. The truth is, these problems will all continue as we move forward. Whether Trump's in office or not, we will be facing the same problems. In fact, if Trump wins this election, these problems are definitely going to continue. You'll see more rioting. You will see more of all the same thing. More racism and blah, 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 whatever. Everything we talked about. You'll see more of it. But even with that said, my argument isn't necessarily an argument for Trump. So if you don't want to vote for Trump, you don't necessarily have to. I just don't want you to vote for Biden. Here's the thing. Trump's not God's greatest gift. He isn't the second coming. He isn't the hero of the republic. He's not the savior of the country. I don't view Trump as any of those things. What Trump is, though, at this moment in time, is a brief stopgap. He is a brief barrier between the rest of the country and the radical, wild leftist mob, the Orwellian-driven, Marxist-thinking, psychotic, fucking Nazi-mirroring leftist Wilsonian Democrat left that wants to take over the government and use it in full swing as a battering ram against anyone who opposes them. He is a temporary stopgap from that. And by temporary, I mean about the next 4 years. Here's the thing, and people hate to hear this, but the presidency was not meant to be this important. It wasn't meant to have this much importance, not only in our day-to-day lives, but in the involvement of the country. The president was supposed to be the guy that was kind of the face of the country for a while and, worked out some treaties and, balanced out some tariffs, and that was it. That's all the president was supposed to do. We, the American people, for the last 150 years, have turned the president into a god-like figure. Now, 150 years ago, during the Civil War, we did it to Lincoln, and it may very well have been necessary. Not only because slavery did need to be abolished, but because secession could not be allowed. The states must stay united. It's a mindset that I do agree with. And 150 years ago, it may very well have been what the country needed in order to not only survive the Civil War, but get themselves back together after the Civil War. But the problem with looking at the president as a godlike figure who has all this control is the same problem that the Romans saw with Caesar. Once he got all the power, it became very hard to give it back. Absolute power does corrupt, absolutely. So what do you do about that? Well, we had a pretty good system in this country. If you read the Constitution, it's still there. The checks and balances are in place. No one faction of the government is supposed to have more control over the other, and yet, here we are giving all the power to one man and one branch of the government. The executive branch has increased probably 50-fold since I've been alive, and that's only been 32 years. That's only been, 5 presidents? That's not a lot of time, especially when you consider this country's only 200 and some odd years old. We were never supposed to rely on the president as much as we do. The president was never supposed to do anything for us. They were supposed to be there, kind of help keep the executive branch in order. Then we gave him power of the military, which makes sense, constitutionally speaking. But that was it. The real battles, when it comes to the government in this country, should always be fought at the local level. What happens to you locally is far more important, or should be far more important, than what happens on a federal level. The federal government's not supposed to have any say in your day-to-day life, and yet here we are demanding that they do, or worried to what happens once they do. The local level is where it should be. So when I say Trump is a temporary stopgap, Trump is let me find the right words here. Trump is an opportunity. Trump, 4 more years of Trump is an opportunity for each of us to take a look at our local level and go, okay, what's wrong here? We have a lot of problems in this country. A lot. We will never be able to fix them if we are constantly worried about a radicalized side of our politics taking over our government in ways that we may not be able to get back. We'll never be able to fix the problems if we keep focusing on who the fuck the president is. But right now, considering the Trojan horse that Joe Biden is, we kind of have to be paying attention to that. So, if Trump wins, that gives us 4 years to take a look at all our local officials, all the leftists in our local level, and go, you know what? We want you out. That's what Trump represents. Again, he's not the savior of the republic. He's not going to be the shining light, the second coming. He's none of those things. He is just an ability. He's just an opportunity for us to fix all the leftist factions on our local level so that they don't move up to the federal level, so that we can stop worrying about what's going on the federal level and do what we were supposed to do when this country started, which is pay attention more to the local level. Again, we have real problems in this country. We need to start getting to the bottom of those problems, but we're never going to be able to do that if we keep having to worry about radical, leftist, Marxists, constantly chasing the top spot so they can use it as a battering ram against everything they don't like. Trump is an opportunity to put that on hold for at least 4 more years so we can clean up all the senators and all the representatives who are pushing for that leftist mindset and thinking. So yes, with all that said, I do think, while not life-threatening, this election is a little different than the ones we've had before, because this is the first time that I can remember where we actually have a legit Trojan horse coming into office. And even though the presidency is not supposed to be this powerful, it's not supposed to mean this much, we have pushed it to a point where it does. And the only way that's going to be taken back is if we stop giving it so much power. The problem is we've taken it to this point, so now we have to do something about it. You, me, all of us, we all have to play a little bit of a part. And that starts at the local level. Weed out those bad politicians. And that doesn't mean weed out only the lefties. I think all career politicians should go. I think we need new blood in there all over the place. Republican, Democrat, doesn't matter. But we're not going to be able to do that if we have to worry about people coming into vast positions of authority and power that are intended on controlling the lives of everybody in a way that we can never take back if we decide we don't like it. And that's exactly what you're getting with Joe Biden, unfortunately. So, again, Trump's not the fucking answer to your prayers, but he is a temporary gap between the radical left and the rest of the country. Gives us time to clean up if we so choose to. Benjamin Franklin once told somebody, "We have a republic, madam, if you can keep it." It's our responsibility to keep it. We have to want to keep it. You know, and all this talk of Trump's not going to accept the results of the election, or he won't step down if he loses. Listen, if he loses, he's out. You know, and if he goes, "I'm not going anywhere," the Secret Service will just pick him up and toss him out. That's what they will do. He's not going to lock himself in Tony Montana style with a machine gun and a big pile of coke. As funny as that might be, they'll throw him out. Okay, and listen, I know he's talking about voter fraud and this, that. You have to understand this about Trump. He says a lot of shit. He does. He says a lot of stupid shit. The unfortunate part for Trump and his administration is Trump's mouth, because his administration has done a lot of good things. They've cut taxes where they need to be cut. They've opened up opportunities for people that didn't have them before. They've gotten us out of really bad environmental pacts that were costing us money. We were paying for other people's mistakes. You know, he's done a lot of good things. A great economy working. The problem is he opens his mouth and he says things that scare people who don't know any better. And so, here's the thing. You have to pay attention to what Trump does, not what he says. He says a lot of shit. I'll tell you who won't accept the results of the election, speaking of which, the Democrats. You know how I know this? Because they still don't accept the fact that Trump won the last one. Democrats are the party that considers this lady who lost the government, the race for governor in Georgia, they call her governor, just because they didn't like the fact that a Republican won. They are everything that they say Trump is in order to justify doing what they do to get Trump out. And I think I've said all I can say. So we'll be back after November 17th when my bandwidth space opens up again. And like I said, we'll be bi-weekly from there on out. I hope I've given you some food for thought at least with this last episode for the next couple weeks. Again, I don't think Trump is a savior of any kind, but I do think that between him and Biden, the choice for me is pretty clear. I'm not going to say lesser of two evils, although I do understand where that phrase comes from. I get if you don't want to vote for either of these two guys. I understand the system being bad where only Democrats and only Republicans get to run for president. I think it's fucked up too. I hate it. I really do hate it. But I think I hate the idea of, Wilsonian Democratic leftists taking over the White House and anything else they can get their hands on. I think I hate that a little more. But, like I said, if you're in a state that's, the results are already baked in, I do think you should vote your conscience. I think you should vote for whoever you want. I think if you're in a state like Arizona or Pennsylvania or Wisconsin, I think you should think about it a little more seriously. And I'll leave you with this. Whether we like it or not, the presidential election is going to come down to two men, Trump or Biden. Trump has not extended his executive authority, even in the midst of a crisis. He is the first president in my lifetime, the first president I've seen out of 6 presidents, that has not used any excuse in the book to increase his executive authority. He has started no new wars. In fact, he has pulled us out of many stale wars that we've been stuck in. He has put in far fewer regulations than any other president. He has lowered taxes for everybody across the board. And he has left authority to the states. He leaves authority to the states whenever he can. He is the most constitutionally grounded president I have ever had in my 32 years of existence, which means I'm willing to bet he's the most constitutionally grounded president you've ever seen as well. Or we can get Joe Biden, an obvious Trojan horse for the most power-hungry people in American political history. He's Mr. Mask Mandate, which he has no authority to do. He's Mr. Anti-Gun, which he has no authority to do. He's with Kamala Harris, who is literally licking her chops at the chance to be president, which will happen if Nancy Pelosi successfully reworks the 25th Amendment to remove him at her will, put Harris in charge. Harris, who is the most far radical leftist senator we've ever seen, who stands inside the same Trojan horse as the AOCs and all the other far leftist radical senators, like Bernie Sanders and the like, who want more government control, more lockdowns, more restrictions, more say in everything you do, everything you see, who turn a blind eye to Marxist movements like BLM, who rip the country apart with fake racial divides, who normalize things like riots caused by Antifa, who are modern-day Bolsheviks in brown shirts. The choice to me of who we want as president this time anyway is pretty clear. And hopefully, now that you've heard this, you have a better insight on what's more clear to you as well. And that's where we're going to wrap it up. Thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for supporting the show. You can always leave a 5-star review on iTunes if you would like to help this show grow and get out there. Again, we'll be back sometime after November 17th with a slightly different direction, hopefully. So thanks so much, and we'll see you then.